let me ask Prince. I'm just going through the report, and one of the things it mentioned is the vulnerability of the Earth as a result of this climate change. Do we understand it in Nigeria at all? Because one little dot that Desmond threw at the Senate, it points at the fact that it may be a case of lack of understanding of how vulnerable Nigeria is, may lead to a situation where the Senate and the House of Rep do not take it seriously. They just see it as conversation for the developed world.
I think the issue goes beyond National Assembly. The issue concerns all of us. We are all part of it. We are living in this environment. And I believe one key issue that has come out of that report is this issue of 2%, which is key, which the committee spent so much that this issue that we are talking about, emission, there is a limit to which man can stand. And it has a lot of issues in it. One is the technical issue, one is the knowledge, one is the investment, one is the way of life. And one other aspect which I think it's important in this report, it has come up with what we call an agenda for environment or climate change. It talks about equity, it talks about justice, it talks about the social life, it talks about ethics. I will give you one simple example. I was talking to somebody, and he said, oh, this issue of climate change is an advocacy issue. I want to say it bluntly. With all due respect, I've been in this process for over 2 decades. It goes beyond advocacy. Our life is threatened. I heard Malero introducing the program this morning and talking about flooding. We're all witnesses of what happened 2 years ago in Lokoja axis. We spent some time doing a study on that. And I've listened to a number of arguments, a number of things, and so on. Most of the problem that I see in an environment is more of man-made. And that underscored the report of this committee. The committee agreed that there are some natural forces that will create climate change. But the human element is key, and we cannot run away from that human element. And how do we avoid managing this human element? I'm sorry to say, we are a society that is not disciplined. Everybody will throw waste, will throw everything under the gutter. Government will say, do this, say it's government. It doesn't concern me. We're all there. And if you take, I can give you a series of examples. And one of the reports, in that report too, is also talk about the pastoral issues. People rearing cow, rearing this. Do you know that on the express, Lagos to Ibadan, you now see cow, these pastorals, already having their cow there, all this type of thing. Look at what happened in Benue, over these people taking up this and so on. It's all part of the effect of climate change. Because if you have a grazing field, and this grazing field is no longer coming up with grass, then you look for somewhere else. Somebody else has taken up your problem. And don't forget, even when you look at the history of Darfur, one of the biggest problems of Darfur has to do more with the food shortage, which also was caused by the climate change. And a lot, even our marine is going to affect our marine. It's going to, the report itself gave us about 10 key issues, or what you call the threat, even our businesses. So there is a need for us to seriously address this issue.
Okay, I will just very quickly nip in there. Let me jump in there, because the question I asked is about our legislators.
Yes.
Like the Yorubas will say, and with respect to those of you who are older than me, where there is no law, there's no crime, there's no sin.
Yes.
Do we have enough legislation to ensure that we have things we can sink our teeth into that would help Nigerians to understand that it is criminal to dump here, it is criminal to dig here, it is criminal to do the things that would lead to emission of gas that is causing the problem?
We have enough laws, it's implementation.
Okay.
And let me also quickly address that. You see, when I was talking, I said all of us must buy in. One, most of these institutions are underfunded. Managing climate change as a regulatory framework is a technical issue. So you need skilled people. And luckily for us in Nigeria, you now have what you call a department under the Federal Ministry of Environment. And it's not just a department. Every country has what you call a DNA, a designated national authority. If the UN is going to deal with us on this, it is that organization that they will deal with. What you find out in Nigeria is everybody to himself, God for us all. Everybody is an expert on climate change. Everybody is this. So there is a need for us to fund that department. There is also a need for us to ensure that the right people in terms of knowledge, in terms of education, are given there. That's one side. All of us, whether national, all the Ministry of the Justice, National Assembly, everybody must buy into it. And that means we need to introduce education for environment and education for sustainable development. The UN appreciated this point. And that was why 2 years ago, some of us had the privilege of being involved in this critical issue in Georgia, that there is a key element in letting people understand what you are talking about. So it's one thing to have the law. It's another thing for people to understand the law. It's another thing for the law to be properly implemented. And it's another thing for people to buy into it. So it's a collective effort on all of us to make sure that we get it right.
It's absolutely right. But you know what? Interestingly, in the House of Assembly and the legislature, we've been trying to get a climate change bill signed by the presidency for the last 2 years. This bill was formulated by Senator Grace Bent when she was chairman of the Senate committee, and it's a very well thought out bill. It advocates setting up a climate change commission, which takes climate change issues out of the Ministry of Environment. Ministry of Environment is still there. Ministry of Justice would be there. Ministry of Education, as Prince was saying, would be there. Ministry of Agriculture. It makes it a cross-sectoral entity that will now be the one that is tackling climate change. It's taken 2 years and it still hasn't gone back into the House of Senate. Meanwhile, other bills which are a little bit frivolous have been passed just like this, just like that. They might be important bills, but they can't be as important as the climate change bill, which we've just started this program by saying it is the most important issue facing mankind. For 2 years, this bill has been waiting and it still hasn't gone through.
What is the status of this bill?
The status of the bill?
Yes.
The House of Reps has actually passed it, and it's waiting now for the Senate. But as we said,
so the last 2 years it's been with the Senate.
It was with the Senate 2 years ago. The president didn't sign it. It came back, and it's now going through the circuit yet again. So why
more
hasn't the bill
readings
been passed?
before it will eventually.
Now, Desmond, all this that the two of you have just said now brings me to the subject of today's discussion, domesticating that report. I mean, what you have just said gives me the impression that we are nowhere near having anybody that can even begin to discuss the domestication of this matter, as important as it is to our survival on Earth.
No, sorry, I don't understand what you mean by you don't have people who can domesticate. Let me put it this way.
No, you don't have a body that can even begin to discuss it.
I've just told you that we now have a department in the Federal Ministry of Environment specifically addressing climate change.
Okay.
It is my view, and from experience, that since UN, because everything you are talking about come under what you call the United Nations, UNFCCC, which is a United Nations body that is concerned with climate change.
Okay.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to wait till whether a bill is passed or a bill is not passed.
Okay.
We have a challenge on our hands. And in addressing this challenge, the first thing in my view is let us empower this ministry, this department, as a starting up. Again, don't forget that when we started the process of FEPA, what is now this type of thing today, and what has come out of FEPA, it started from a process. So to me, I think it is important for us. Don't let us get involved in what I've always described as interest, because that point you made, in my view, I mean, I've been part of it. know the beginning, I know the end of that story, and I was part of the group that even made submission when Senator Bent was there.
Okay.
But you see, I've always been saying something, that the world is a world of managing interest. I want to move away from this whole concept of whether you pass the bill or you don't pass the bill.
To action.
To the center point.
Yes.
And the center point to me, is man. How do we ensure that the interest of Nigerians and Nigerian people are protected?
Yeah, exactly.
Let us start from the process. Empower this something. Let us have the best, because the people who have even wrote the report, they also emphasize. Let me also mention one thing, which is even more serious than we are thinking. The report clearly stated that there is now a road to low carbon economy. There is now a road to renewable energy, which means less of coal, less of fossil oil, which means our oil. 80% or 90% of our revenue comes from oil. We are going to be affected by oil, by this thing. And if you look at it, the Americans, the Europeans, they are now talking about renewable energy.
Very much so.
In the last few weeks, you will see a lot of people coming to Nigeria. They are talking about renewable energy. And we don't understand that the message they are passing to us is clear. We don't need your oil. America has come up with share. Let us diversify. I think it was Delta State or so who was talking about away from the oil. I think
Delta beyond oil.
I think as a nation, we now must address what are the investment opportunities that we can get in the area of renewable energy, in the area of using our gas, using our wind, using our fuel, using our solar. Those are key issues. Now we talk about GTP, the basin. Those are areas that we should start to look at and see how we can invest, and then encourage our younger ones we can create jobs. You see, out of climate change, there is business. I've been on the World Business Council for years.
Green economy.
Yes.
Yes.
You start to talk about the concept of green economy. And I've said it on a number of occasions. Oyinbo man that came up with something always has an answer to the problem. So, and the man has already told us, part of that report emphasized the report on renewable energy, on developing those things that can move forward, less of oil. So unless we want to face reality and say, look here, over the next few years, what we are getting from oil will be less. And as a nation, all of us must stand up to be counted. That, to me, is very important.